Have you ever looked at your life and felt that something essential was missing? As if the world around you were a stage and you had been handed a role you never auditioned for? Imagine a small, low-lit room inside your skull where a single filament of attention waits like a candle in a draft, ready to flare. What if I told you that there is a faculty inside you that can lift the curtain and show the machinery of your own perception, not as mysticism, but as a lived, painful, liberating process? Carl Jung wrote about an insistence from the unconscious to be seen and integrated. He did not call it third eye activation in clinical terms, but his maps point to the same movement a mind makes when it refuses a comfortable illusion and demands truth. This is not one more feel-good video about spirituality. This is a careful, at times brutal account of what happens when that inner aperture opens. There is gain and there is loss. Clarity arrives with a price. Relationships rearrange, beliefs combust. The safe parts of your identity feel threatened and sometimes go up in flames. If you want a souvenir sense of awakening, you will leave disappointed. If you want clarity that alters everything, stay with me. Over the next parts, you will see ancestral hints, modern biology, the raw phenomenology of opening, clear signals to watch for, the shadow you will confront, practical disciplined practices rooted in Jungian psychology and breathwork to cultivate the capacity without resorting to substances, real human scenes so you can orient, and an epilogue that maps what 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months look like if you choose to hold this light. If you are looking for quick rituals or crystal remedies, this is not for you. This is about perception, neural substrates, and ruthless honesty. Stay until the end and you will know what waking costs and what it affords. If you are ready to wake, be ready to lose what kept you safe. Long before modern neuroscience and long before Jung, there were traditions that noticed this doorway. In India, the Ajna Center was described as a locus of inner seeing and subtle knowing. Buddhist texts hinted at a mind that sees without relying on sense gates. Egyptian scarabs and the symbol of an eye over a horizon suggested inner sight not tied to ordinary light. Indigenous storytellers from different continents spoke of elders who could read the weather in their bones and the intentions of others in a silence. These are not identical claims, but they are convergent signals. In one temple, the candles smell of jasmine and old resin. In another monastery, you can feel the scrape of monk robes and hear the hush of metal bowls. In Egypt, the air is dry and warm, and the stone is close enough to touch. Across eras, this faculty was narrated in images, because direct description fails to carry the weight of subjective change. Jung observed mythic patterns and said myth is psychology written in symbolic language. He noticed that the same motifs keep appearing, where cultures point to an inner aperture that reorganizes identity. That continuity matters. It tells us this phenomenon is not a quirky modern meme, but a recurring human response to deeper layers of the psyche. We can move from myth to tissue. At the center of many modern discussions stands the pineal gland, a tiny endocrine organ. It secretes melatonin and has structural elements sensitive to light. Some researchers have explored its relationship to endogenous trace compounds and the possibility that it participates in states of altered cognition. Others have mapped neural circuitry that links sensory filtering, attention, and the default mode network, the subsystem most implicated in self-referential thought. In accessible language, think of the pineal as a kind of gatekeeper that senses shifts in light and time and then coordinates hormones that alter how you experience inner time. Studies on DMT production in mammalian brain tissue remain controversial but intriguing. Researchers have documented shifts in brain network connectivity in practices like meditation and in psychedelic states that correspond to what first-person reports call expanded perception or dissolving of ego boundaries. The weight here is in correlation, not neat causation. Biochemistry meets phenomenology and says this is not pure metaphor. There is a physiology that can tilt you toward broader or narrower windows of perception. To translate into practical terms, that means disciplined practice can alter network habits and thus change what you experience as real. When that aperture opens, what happens feels like displacement and recomposition at once. You notice details you never noticed before, the way sound takes a different texture, the way faces seem to hold histories like sediment. You may experience a tremor in your stomach, a metallic taste, a ringing at the edge of hearing. Colors can deepen and peripheral vision expand. Time does strange things. Minutes can stretch into an eternity or compress into an instant of revelation. The first scene I want you to hold in imagination is the ordinary kitchen of someone named Maya. She is washing a plate, the hum of the refrigerator is steady, the lemon soap scent bright. Suddenly, a familiar childhood melody emerges in the pattern of steam rising, and she experiences an ache like the ocean pressing into a cave. Her eyes are wet, she cannot name the memory at first, and then she realizes it is the body remembering a lullaby her grandmother sang. That remembering is not cognitive, it is a sensed registration resonating in a place just beneath words. In another example, Daniel sits in a meeting and finds his attention sliding sideways into shapes on the carpet. The weave becomes an archetype, and with it an insight about a relationship he has been avoiding. These scenes are sensory. You will hear the scrape of ceramic, the hiss of breath, feel the cold of tile underfoot. Smell lemon in old wood. The opening is both sacred and humiliating because you begin to see the architecture of your own deception. There are early signs that tend to accompany this entrance. Pay attention because most people mistake them for anxiety or pathology. One sign is heightened sensitivity to light and sound. You may find harsh lights unbearable or notice noise like a sharp flavor. Second is visceral recall, dreams that come with archetypal imagery and leave you exhausted. Third is social friction. Simple jokes become unbearable, and small talk feels corrosive. Fourth is physical shifts, like changes in sleep patterns, appetite, or a sudden intolerance for substances that once dulled you. Fifth is an increased frequency of meaningful coincidences, moments that feel like the world is indexing specifically to you. Sixth is an inner voice that grows less interested in defending old narratives and more interested in asking uncomfortable questions. Seventh is the emergence of old pain that resurfaces without obvious trigger, memory sensations unmoored from a timeline. These signs do not mean you are broken. They mean your system is reorganizing. Notice them. Name them. The community that shares this path is vital. Pause here with me. If you have felt any of these, note in the comments which sign surprised you most. Start your comment with "sign" and give one sentence about when you first noticed it. Sharing helps us map the territory and know we are not alone. This opening also brings a shadow and costs that are real. People leave you. The friends who anchored the old story cannot hold the new contours, and relationships narrow. Jobs that used to satisfy become hollow. There is a period of mourning. Imagine Layla, a librarian, who after months of quiet practice finds herself unable to remain in a routine that once felt meaningful. Her partner Thomas asks what she is doing, and her answers are slippery. Tension builds, and conversation turns to anger. Dialogue between them is short and glassy. Layla says, "I cannot pretend to be who I was." Thomas replies, "I do not know who you are anymore." Layla says, "Then what do you want me to be?" Thomas answers, "I want you to be the person you promised when we made plans." Layla says, "The promise was made under different rules." Thomas says, "So make new promises." Layla says, "Making promises feels impossible now." Thomas says, "Then do not make them." Layla says, "Then what do we do?" The room is cold. Their hands do not meet. This exchange is small but precise. It illustrates the cost. There is humiliation when social support erodes. There is also ecstasy when you realize the relationships that remain are chosen by truth and not convenience. Tension here is thick. You may experience panic waves, grief, a sense of betrayal by your own desires. This is not melodrama. It is a structural reordering in which your previous equilibrium dissolves and must be rebuilt with new materials. That grief is a necessary furnace. If you choose the path, there are methods to cultivate the aperture with integrity and discipline inspired by Jungian integration practices and breath-centered training. The first practice is daily sitting meditation with an emphasis on noticing, not doing. Technique note: Short description. The posture should be upright but relaxed, with the spine aligned and the chin slightly tucked. Close the eyes and anchor attention at the center of the forehead for 10 minutes, increasing gradually. Allow thoughts to appear, notice them, and return to the breath. Practice technical description. The breath work is simple but precise. 2 to 4 cycles of slow diaphragmatic breathing, followed by a subtle retention at the top of the exhale, encourages vagal tone and stabilizes attention. Another practice is active journaling, a method where you begin with free associative writing for 15 minutes, then read the page aloud and underline imagery and recurring metaphors. This exposes patterns between conscious speech and deeper images. Technical detail on journaling. The process of reading aloud moves content from private thought into oral witness, shifting neural encoding and allowing the analyst in you to observe instead of be consumed. Third practice is pranayama and subtle sound exercises. Sit in a quiet place, inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 6 counts, and hum on the exhale to feel vibration in the facial bones. Technical description on hum. The humming increases nasal cavity resonance and stimulates cranial nerves that interface with autonomic regulation, producing a felt sense of coherence. Fourth practice is disciplined retreat. Weekly, a 2-hour silence practice where you remove digital inputs and sit in presence noticing arising material, then record impressions after. These are not tricks, they are disciplined rewiring. Each practice has technical intentions: respiratory modulation, shift in attentional network, and integration of imagery into narrative. The exercises are difficult and demand a witness. This is where community matters and where therapists or guides can help. To illustrate with characters, Marco, a jazz musician, adopted the breath practices and discovered that his improvisation became less about virtuosity and more about listening to interstitial silence. Sophia, a data analyst, began to notice ethical patterns at work that she had previously ignored. Aaron, a nurse, found that his capacity for presence with patients deepened and that his clinical judgment sharpened. Priya, an elementary teacher, learned to hold a classroom without authoritarian control through breath-anchored presence. Each of them names distinct benefits, but they also name similar costs: quarantine from old crowds, confusing family talk, and a strange loneliness that comes with waking. Their stories are concrete. In one scene, Marco walks into a dim club, the smell of spilled beer and cigarette smoke, the low rumble of bass vibrating in his chest. He breathes slow, and in the middle of a solo, he stops playing and listens instead. The silence in the room becomes a third voice, and the audience leans forward. The presence he cultivated magnetizes attention. This is not supernatural, but it appears so to others because you are less reactive and more attuned. When the aperture opens, you will experience changes that look like superpowers, but are more accurately new skills of perception and regulation. You may become more persuasive, not because you wield rhetoric, but because you emanate calibrated presence. You may find decision-making easier because the clutter of old fears falls away, and you have clearer valence on what aligns with your emergent truth. You will notice micro-expressions and micro-movements in people and be able to respond with precision. That is ethical power and demands responsibility. There is also a pattern of synchronicities that seems to increase. The world offers you confirmations and openings as long as you do not misinterpret them as magical entitlement. An important social function emerges. When you tend this faculty and integrate shadow material, you become a stabilizing presence for others. You do not rescue, you model authenticity and hold a reflective surface that lets others catch themselves. This is service. It is the functional output of a mature aperture. We must also be precise about danger. Without integration, the opening can destabilize mental health in vulnerable individuals. If you have a history of psychosis or bipolar disorder, be extremely careful. Seek professional guidance. The practice of opening is not therapy alone. It is a psycho-spiritual path, and it can aggravate underlying conditions. This is why structured integration protocols, journaling, therapy, and safe community support are necessary. The skill of naming your contents, no matter how raw, prevents their domination. Now imagine a longer arc with concrete time slices. 1 month in, you will notice subtle, steady changes. After the first week, practices often produce instability, sleep shifts, and the surfacing of old memory images that feel raw and confusing. By the end of the month, your capacity for noticing increases, and certain reactions that used to be automatic begin to slow. You are tired more often, but in a different way. Your tastes change. Food and media that once pleased you may feel discordant. You feel both relief and a new loneliness. 3 months in, the pattern settles into a new rhythm. The nervous system has begun recalibrating default network connections, and you will report clearer decision-making, less need for social validation, and a growing capacity to sustain uncomfortable truth talks. Relationships will have pruned. Some friends have left, new people have arrived. You notice that your presence in rooms is different, a quiet gravity that is not domineering but attentive. You find new time for creative projects that had been waiting in corners of your life. 6 months in, the transformation shows in conduct and in social structure. You have practical markers. Work has shifted in direction or style, you speak differently, your schedule changed, your rest cycles normalized, and you encounter fewer existential shocks. There is a fuller capacity to hold sorrow and joy. You also have a responsibility. The voice of the small self is quieter, and you can choose service-oriented action. The work of integration is ongoing, but the new patterns are durable. These 3 timescapes are not romantic promises, but map points so you can plan behaviorally and ethically for the costs and gains. Throughout this process, nameable practices will anchor you. Keep a weekly integration session with a therapist or trusted friend. Maintain a daily sitting routine, journal nightly using active language and imagery. Maintain a breath practice with measured counts and occasional humming sessions. Preserve a weekly silence retreat, and ensure at least one extended retreat every 6 months to reset input thresholds. Tune your environment, physical, light, diet, and social circle to support vulnerability. Reduce stimulants and scheduling overload, and build a ritual of witness where you read your pages aloud to someone attuned or into a recorder and listen back. The technical mechanics of these routines are small in themselves, but cumulatively they scaffold neural change. They also cultivate moral imagination and protect you from the kinds of charismatic delusions that can be dangerous if the sense of expansion becomes a narcissistic badge. There will be dark nights and moments of acute tension when old identity fights to survive. I will give you 2 expanded examples of that pressure. The first is private fear, a moment when you stand at night and wonder if you are losing your mind. You feel cold, your pulse is loud, you scroll through messages and cannot stop the inner interrogation. You hear a memory voice saying you are selfish for wanting this. You feel guilt swell, a nausea that is both physical and moral. The second is social rupture, when someone close says you are different, and you answer with honesty, and they recoil because your truth undermines their safety. You feel anger and abandonment, and a lonely axis of choice emerges. Keep breathing, name the felt sense, place it in the body, and practice tolerating the wave without following its script. Each wave is finite, and practice increases tolerance. These tension moments are part of the refining. The path requires companions. Name a handful of figures who will appear in your journey and the actions they take to orient practical imagination. Maya, she becomes a witness and keeper of domestic memory. Daniel, he brings boundary examples during workplace stress. Layla, she goes through relational rupture and learns to negotiate honest promises. Marco, he applies presence to craft and invites you to practice in performance. Sophia, she models applied ethics in corporate environments. Aaron, he teaches bedside presence. Priya, she uses presence to deepen pedagogy. Thomas, he represents those who struggle to adapt. Each of these secondary characters shows how the aperture plays out across domains and anchors abstract claims into lived examples. To close, return to essentials. You arrived here perhaps by curiosity, perhaps by a private ache. Now you know that opening your third eye is not
A one-off event, but a process of attunement and integration. It is mythic in metaphors, technical in physiology, and brutally personal in consequences. Practice daily, sitting, breathe with measured counts, journal aloud, do weekly silence retreats, monitor sleep and diet, and build a witness community. Expect cost, expect loss, and expect a new capacity for service. If this material resonated, consider subscribing to follow this series, where we will map practices, papers, and interviews with researchers and clinicians. If you found a particular sign that matched your own experience, leave a comment beginning with sign and one sentence about when you first noticed it. It helps others and it helps shape future episodes. 1 month from now, you are tired but more honest. 3 months from now, your attention is a tool you wield with less reactivity and more care. 6 months from now, your life has realigned into a pattern that honors truth over comfort and service over performance. The promise here is not special powers, but increased responsibility. The ache that pulled you is the same force that can free others when you integrate and show up. If you are ready to keep practicing, remember this single directing aim. Choose clarity over comfort and choose the slow work. If you stay, you will lose some things and gain the capacity to hold more of life without flinching. Now breathe, notice the quiet at the center of your forehead, and begin. If this touched you, share with one person who needs honest conversation, and consider subscribing to walk this out together. You came for a revelation, and you will leave with work. That is the difference between spectacle and cultivation. See with care, not with hunger.